7:18 a.m. A Russian military freight train is moving outside occupied Luhansk at roughly 44 kilometers per hour, carrying fuel tankers, ammunition cars, and frontline logistic supplies through what its crew believes is a protected rail corridor. Then, a drone strikes near the center of the formation. A fuel car ruptures, fire spreads across the steel frame, and within seconds, secondary blasts shake the morning air. Reports suggest the strike package included FP2 class drones carrying warheads in the 65 to 95 kilogram range, supported by smaller FPV reconnaissance drones tracking the train's movement in real time. But this was not a random ambush. Ukrainian operators had been studying the route, timing, and cargo pattern for days. Before we break down how this attack unfolded, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more battlefield analysis, military technology stories, and modern war documentaries. 6:46 a.m. The Russian military freight train is already moving northwest through occupied Luhansk, holding a steady speed of roughly 42 kilometers per hour. From the outside, nothing about the movement looks unusual. It is a standard logistics run. Fuel tankers, ammunition cars, spare parts, repair equipment, and package supplies intended for Russian units closer to the front. The rail corridor has been used before. That is why the crew believes it is manageable. Along the route, protection is built around three main systems. Pantsir S-1 batteries guard the wider approach with missiles and rapid-fire cannons. Tor M2 units cover the low-altitude threat zone near the railway, where small drones can appear with little warning. Behind them, the R-33OZH GTEL electronic warfare system works to disrupt GPS signals, jam control links, and flood the spectrum around the corridor. On paper, the train is moving under a layered shield. But the weakness is not the train itself. The weakness is repetition. For several days, Ukrainian operators from the 414th Unmanned Systems Brigade, known as Magyar's Birds, have been watching the wider rail pattern. They are studying departure windows, wagon types, thermal signatures, intercepted communications, and small delays that appear when heavy cargo is moved under pressure. Individually, these details mean very little. Together, they begin to form a map. By the time the train leaves the Luhansk area, its movement is no longer just a route. It is a prediction. Analysts have narrowed the danger point to a short open rail segment near the Sverdlovsk Municipal District outside Dovzhansk, where shallow embankments limit cover and localized air defense coverage is not continuous. The train has not been attacked yet, no drone has struck, no explosion has occurred, but somewhere else the decision has already been made. 7:09 a.m. The train is now approaching the open rail segment that Ukrainian operators have already marked as the danger point. Its speed has dropped slightly to around 39 kilometers per hour. Not enough to raise alarm, but enough to confirm that the cargo is heavy. The fuel tankers and ammunition cars are moving in the exact order analysts expected. Above the corridor, a small FPV reconnaissance drone climbs to nearly 175 meters, staying outside the most obvious firing angles. Its job is not to attack. It is there to confirm the train's position, measure its movement, and send final corrections through the interference around the route. Russian defenses begin to react. Behind the air defense layer, the R-33OZH GTEL electronic warfare system starts pushing interference into the GPS band, trying to disrupt navigation, weaken control links, and make the drone picture harder to read. Nearby Pantsir S-1 and Tor M2 crews begin scanning for low-altitude threats. But the target picture is unclear. The train is moving, jamming is active, and multiple teams are trying to understand the same warning at the same time. Then, the first detonation comes. It is not the main strike. A smaller FPV drone hits near the rear section of the formation, close to a coupling area and support equipment. The blast throws sparks across the railbed and damages part of the outer structure, but it does not destroy the train. That is the point. The explosion is loud enough to trigger confusion, but limited enough to make Russian escorts believe this may be a harassment attack rather than a coordinated strike package. For a moment, their attention moves backward. Small arms and machine guns open fire into the morning air, Tracer rounds cut across the corridor, but they are firing at movement they cannot clearly track. And if you are following this breakdown, subscribe to the channel for more clear battlefield analysis and modern warfare stories. Because while Russian units are reacting to the first blast, the real weapon is already closing in. A heavier FP2 class drone is approaching from another angle, carrying a warhead large enough to change the entire outcome in seconds. 7:18 a.m. The main strike arrives from the rear quarter of the train. A heavier FP2 class drone drops low over the rail corridor, then climbs slightly in the final seconds to stabilize its approach. It is carrying a warhead estimated at roughly 72 to 90 kilograms, far beyond the payload of a standard FPV drone. This is not a weapon designed only to damage a small component. It is built to break structure, ignite stored energy, and force a logistics system into failure. The selected target is a fuel tank car near the middle of the formation. That placement matters. A hit on the locomotive might stop movement, but it would not guarantee the destruction of the cargo behind it. A strike into the center of the train creates a different problem: pressure, fire, fragmentation, and heat spreading in both directions at once. The drone impacts. For less than a second, there is only a sharp flash against the metal skin of the tanker. Then the shell fails. Fuel bursts outward under pressure, forming a burning cloud along the side of the rail line. The blast wave rolls through the consist, striking nearby wagons with enough force to damage fittings, bend panels, and throw debris across the embankment. Inside the locomotive cab, the crew feels the shock before they understand it. The vibration does not feel like a normal external strike at first. It feels like a mechanical failure somewhere deep in the train. Brake rupture, axle damage, coupling collapse. But that assumption disappears when the rear mirrors catch the orange reflection moving across the tank cars. Emergency braking begins. But a freight train carrying hundreds of tons of fuel and ammunition cannot stop like a vehicle on a road. At roughly 38 kilometers per hour, every second of delay pushes damaged steel farther down the track. The brakes grip unevenly. The burning section pulls against wagons still moving under inertia. Heat spreads into nearby cargo compartments. Then, the secondary blasts begin to build. Small detonations break through the noise first, irregular and scattered. Each one makes the scene harder to control. The train is no longer simply under attack, it has become unstable from within. 7:20 a.m. The rail corridor is now filled with smoke, heat distortion, and broken radio traffic. Russian defenses are active, but they are no longer facing a single drone. They are trying to respond to a full kill chain that has already moved through detection, tracking, validation, strike, and damage assessment. The R330ZH GTEL electronic warfare system continues pushing interference into the GPS band. Control links weaken. Navigation data becomes unreliable. For a moment, one Ukrainian drone loses stable satellite correlation, but it does not fall out of the sequence. It shifts into inertial-assisted navigation, using preloaded movement data and short correction windows to stay on course. That is the important detail. The jamming can disrupt signals, but it cannot erase the prediction that was built before the strike began. Nearby, Pantsir S1 and Tor M2 crews scan the low-altitude zone for follow-on targets. Their systems are designed to detect and engage aerial threats, but the environment is collapsing around them. Smoke from the fuel fire reduces visibility. Heat signatures multiply. Burning metal, damaged wagons, and secondary flashes all compete with the actual drone picture. At the same time, coordination begins to slow down. One team reports a drone attack. Another treats the first blast as damage to the train itself. A third waits for confirmation from the rail security channel. That delay creates a narrow but critical window of roughly 5 to 7 minutes. During that window, smaller FPV reconnaissance drones keep watching from offset angles. One holds altitude near 185 meters. Another shifts laterally by nearly 300 meters to avoid the strongest jamming field. Their corrections are not dramatic. a heading adjustment of about 2 degrees, a few meters of altitude compensation, and updated confirmation that the damaged train is still moving. But in this kind of operation, small numbers decide the outcome. The strike is no longer dependent on one aircraft, one signal, or one operator. It is distributed across prepared data, backup navigation, and real-time observation. Russian electronic warfare is still powerful, but by this point, it is fighting the aftermath of a decision that was made before the train entered the corridor. 7:27 a.m. The first fuel fire has already changed the entire situation. What began as a moving logistics train is now a damaged chain of steel, heat, pressure, and unstable cargo. The locomotive is still present, some wagons are still connected, but operationally, the train is no longer functioning as transport. The fire moves faster than the response. A fuel tanker near the center of the formation continues burning with enough intensity to deform nearby metal surfaces. Heat transfers through couplings, side panels, brake lines, and exposed fittings. Within minutes, the danger spreads from the initial impact point to the adjacent ammunition cars. This is where the incident becomes more difficult to control. An ammunition wagon does not have to explode immediately to become dangerous. It only needs to reach the wrong temperature for the wrong amount of time. Propellant charges begin to cook off. Packaged ordnance becomes unstable. Small internal detonations start first, irregular and scattered, almost hidden beneath the larger roar of the fire. Then a stronger secondary blast breaks through. It does not behave like one clean explosion. It comes in fragments, a sharp burst, a pause, another flash, then a deeper detonation that shakes the rail bed. Each blast changes the threat picture for everyone nearby. Crews cannot tell which wagon is burning, which wagon is safe, or which section may fail next. The damage is no longer limited to the cargo. A section of rail is warped by heat. Wooden and concrete support elements near the track are scorched or fractured. Signal equipment along the corridor is damaged by fragmentation. Brake systems on several wagons fail under stress. At least 6 to 9 rail cars are now either burning, disabled, or structurally compromised. The material loss is significant. One fuel tanker can carry tens of tons of fuel. A small block of ammunition cars may contain artillery shells, propellant charges, and packaged ordnance intended for several days of frontline distribution. In total, the destroyed or unusable cargo could represent more than 180 to 260 tons of military supply. But the larger impact is not only measured in tons. The rail corridor must now be closed, inspected, cleared, and repaired. Damaged track has to be replaced. Surviving wagons must be separated and checked. Unstable ammunition has to be handled slowly. Recovery teams cannot rush into a scene where secondary detonations may still occur. That delay matters. Every hour the line remains blocked affects the schedule behind it. Other trains must wait, reroute, or unload farther from the front. Supplies that were supposed to move by rail may need to shift to trucks, which require more fuel, more drivers, more security, and more time. A single destroyed freight movement can force adjustments across an entire logistics chain. This is the real effect of the strike. Ukraine did not only destroy fuel and ammunition, it damaged timing, it interrupted confidence. It forced Russian logistics officers to ask whether a familiar route was still usable, whether the next train would need more protection, and whether the pattern itself had become the vulnerability. By this point, the train still exists, in pieces, but as a military supply system, it has already stopped moving. 7:42 a.m. The fire is still visible along the rail corridor, but the most important damage has already moved beyond the burning train. It is now inside the logistics system behind it. This is the part that matters. The train was not defeated only because one drone reached one fuel tanker. It was defeated because its movement had become predictable. The timing, the cargo order, the repeated route, the protected corridor, and the gaps between defensive zones all formed a pattern. Once that pattern was understood, the train was no longer just a moving target. It became a scheduled event. That is the larger shift in modern warfare. A supply route that repeats itself too often can become intelligence. A rail line that seems secure can become a map of habits. A convoy that moves at the same hour through the same junctions, with the same types of cargo, creates data without realizing it. And in this case, that data gave Ukrainian operators enough confidence to prepare the strike before the train reached the vulnerable segment. The battlefield is no longer limited to trenches, armored vehicles, or direct contact zones. It now extends into rail corridors, fuel depots, ammunition transfer points, repair yards, bridge crossings, and logistics nodes far behind the front. A train moving 40 kilometers from a frontline position may still be inside the operational battlefield if drones, reconnaissance systems, and intelligence teams can track it long enough. That is why this event matters beyond the immediate loss. The destroyed cargo may total hundreds of tons. The repair costs may reach millions in equivalent value, but the bigger cost is uncertainty. The next rail movement now requires more screening, more counter-drone coverage, more route variation, more escort coordination, and more time. Every extra layer of protection slows the supply system down. My personal view is this: the most significant part of this story is not only the power of the FP2 class drones, it is the way Ukraine turned routine movement into a calculated strike opportunity. In modern war, distance alone no longer guarantees safety. What matters is whether the opponent can observe your pattern, measure your timing, and predict your next move. For Russia, the warning is clear. A protected rail corridor is not truly protected if the schedule is exposed. A train is not safe simply because it is behind the front. And a logistics system becomes vulnerable when it relies on repetition more than adaptation. So the real question is not only how this train was hit. The bigger question is how many other supply movements are already being watched in the same way. What do you think? Are drones and intelligence fusion making rear area logistics as dangerous as the front line? And can Russia change its rail supply system fast enough to avoid more predictive strike corridors like this one?